You know that feeling when you have a clear picture of the life you want, but when it comes time to actually move toward it, something in you quietly resists. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle pull away. You think about starting, you even plan it out. Maybe you open a tab, write a few lines, sketch an idea, and then, somehow, hours pass. The intention is still there, but the action never quite catches up. And what makes it more confusing is that the ambition is real. You care. You want more. You imagine a different version of your life with surprising clarity, but your behavior doesn't always reflect that. Most people don't understand this state very well. From the outside, it gets labeled quickly, lazy, undisciplined, unfocused, someone who talks more than they do. And after hearing that enough times, something starts to stick. You begin to wonder if maybe that's just who you are, but what's often missed is that this isn't a lack of desire. It's a mismatch, a pattern, and once you look at it closely, it starts to make a different kind of sense, because there's a certain kind of person who appears lazy, but is actually carrying a very active inner world. Someone who thinks deeply, imagines vividly, and holds themselves to quiet, often unspoken standards. And that combination can create friction. This is the psychology of people who feel lazy but are deeply ambitious. And there's more going on here than people realize. When you look at this through a psychological lens, the first thing that becomes clear is that motivation isn't just about willpower. It's about how the brain evaluates effort, reward, and risk. There's a part of your brain constantly asking a simple question. Is this worth it right now? Not in a logical way, but in an emotional, energy-based way. If the task feels overwhelming, unclear, or disconnected from immediate reward, your brain doesn't interpret that as important. It interprets it as costly, and it subtly steers you away. What's interesting is that people who are highly imaginative or future-oriented often experience this more intensely because they don't just see the goal, they see everything it requires. All the steps, all the possible outcomes, all the ways it could go wrong. So instead of feeling pulled forward, they feel weighed down before they even begin. From a neuroscience perspective, this often involves how the brain's reward system processes delayed gratification. Some people experience a strong dopamine response from progress itself. They start something, and the act of moving forward feels energizing. But others don't get that same reinforcement until much later. So the beginning feels heavy, not because they don't care, but because their brain hasn't learned to associate early effort with immediate reward. There's also something else happening beneath the surface, a quiet tension between expectation and identity. People who feel both lazy and ambitious often carry a very specific internal standard, not always conscious but present. They don't just want to do something. They want to do it well. And if they can't see a clear path to doing it in a way that feels meaningful or right, they hesitate. Not as a choice, but as a response. Because starting imperfectly can feel like a kind of exposure, like stepping into something without the protection of certainty. And for some nervous systems, that feels unsafe. So instead of rushing in, they pause. They wait. They think, sometimes for longer than they intend. And over time, that pause starts to look like avoidance. But it didn't start there. It started as a form of self-protection. If you trace this pattern back a little further, it often connects to earlier experiences. Moments where effort didn't lead to the expected outcome. Or where doing something imperfectly led to criticism instead of support. Or even environments where thinking deeply was encouraged, but acting boldly wasn't. The brain adapts to those conditions. It learns that it's safer to stay in the idea phase, safer to imagine, plan, refine, rather than risk a visible attempt. Because once something becomes real, it can be judged. And the nervous system remembers that. So, what looks like laziness on the surface is often a very efficient system trying to minimize emotional risk. It's not that action isn't desired, it's that action carries weight, and the brain is trying to manage that weight in the best way it knows how. It's important to say this clearly. This pattern isn't better or worse than any other. Some people are naturally action-oriented. They move quickly, learn through doing, and adjust along the way. Others are more reflective. They process internally, anticipate outcomes, and move more carefully. Neither approach is right. They're just different ways of interacting with the world, and both come with trade-offs. The challenge is that in a culture that values visible productivity, the second pattern often gets misinterpreted, especially when the ambition isn't immediately visible to others. But inside, it's there, and sometimes it's intense. There's also a paradox hidden inside this experience. The same mind that struggles to act consistently is often the one capable of deep insight, creativity, and long-term vision. The hesitation isn't always a weakness. Sometimes It's the result of seeing too much at once, of holding multiple possibilities in your head, of wanting to align your actions with something that actually feels meaningful, not just productive. But that depth comes with a cost. It can make simple actions feel complicated. It can turn small decisions into layered internal conversation. And it can create a constant sense that you're not quite doing enough, even when you're thinking all the time. That's a quiet kind of exhaustion, because it doesn't always look like effort from the outside. But internally, there's movement. There's processing, there's pressure, and when that pressure doesn't translate into visible progress, it can start to feel like something is wrong. But the truth is, this pattern makes sense. It developed for a reason. It reflects a mind that is trying to balance caution with desire, depth with action, safety with growth. You're not broken for experiencing that tension. You're someone whose system learned to prioritize certain things over others. And that learning can be understood, even reshaped over time. But it starts with removing the label. Because once you stop calling yourself lazy, you can start asking a different question. Not what's wrong with me, but what is my mind trying to protect me from? That shift alone changes the way you relate to your own behavior. It turns frustration into curiosity, and curiosity opens space. Space to notice patterns without immediately judging them. Space to experiment with small changes that feel safe enough to try. And over time, those small shifts matter more than any sudden burst of motivation. Because this isn't about forcing yourself into a different personality. It's about understanding the one you already have and working with it instead of against it. There's something quietly powerful. To recognize that your ambition isn't fake, it's just expressed differently, sometimes slower, sometimes more internally, but no less real. And maybe the goal isn't to become someone who never hesitates. Maybe it's to become someone who understands their hesitation. Someone who knows when it's coming from fear and when it's coming from insight, because those aren't the same. And learning to tell the difference changes everything. This reassures the viewer and gently invites them to continue. If this feels familiar, there's probably more beneath the surface that hasn't been named yet. Patterns you've noticed, but never quite explained. Ways of thinking that don't fit into simple labels. And once you start seeing them clearly, something shifts. Not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. If you want to explore that further, stay with this. There's more here than it seems. And if this connected with something you've been quietly trying to understand, you can like the video, share it with someone who might feel the same way, and subscribe to the channel. Not as a habit, just as a way of continuing a conversation that already feels a little more honest.